So the people need to be properly informed. That is what helps them to make correct decisions. So last evening, I had the opportunity to talk at length about my vision for the African Union. I had made a decision to come because this position is becoming vacant next year. And after consultations, many of my friends across the continent, they felt that I should offer myself for the position of leadership at this moment in time. We all, among these many friends of mine, are Pan-Africanists. And you know, Pan-Africanism is an ideology coined sometime in the last century. Its intention is to try to emancipate the people of Africa and to raise Africa to the rest of the world level, so that African people can be treated as equal citizens of this globe. As you know, it came against the background of colonial domination of the continent. It raised the consciousness of African people to fight for their liberation. And through a bitter struggle, eventually independence was won across Africa. First, you know, the Ghana was the first African country to become independent. But before that, you need to know that Ethiopia, where we are, is the oldest African country. You know that Ethiopia was never colonized. Ethiopia has always been independent. When the colonialists came here, they found a system of governance that was very much superior to their own. So when they were in Berlin, Ethiopia was excluded in that partition of Africa. But Ethiopia also suffered in that period because of discriminations and so on. So Ethiopia played a role in supporting liberation movements across the continent. That is why the emperor, Haile Selassie, at that time, who was the head of government, invited leadership of the independent African countries and the leadership of the liberation movements to come to Addis Ababa. And Addis Ababa became the venue for the formation of Organization of African Unity here. And 2 weeks ago, to celebrate the opening of a refurbished the African. Then the founders of African Unity who are here, the several heads of state from the country, the countries in the continent which were independent. The several heads of state from the country, the Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah is the one who had convened the first meeting of African leaders in Accra. Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah is the one who had convened the first meeting of African leaders in Accra, Ghana, in 1958. It was here. Ahmed Sekou Touré, who had led the second independent country, that is Guinea, 1958 was here. Mwalimu Julius Nyerere was also here. Leopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal was here. Houphouët-Boigny of Côte d'Ivoire was here. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria was here. And that's when Organization of African Unity was formed. They focus in helping or assisting the unliberated countries of Africa to get freedom. A movement was called here, which is called PAFMEXA, Pan-African Freedom Movement for Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa. And they went further because in South Africa, the words were saying that South Africa was already independent. But then it came up what was called the NIBMA, no independence or majority rule. So Dar es Salaam became the headquarters of liberation of Africa. Mwalimu Nyerere gave facilities and financial support to this liberation movement. And the OAU itself here was basically mobilizing the world for the liberation of Africa. Eventually, with the fall of apartheid regime in South Africa in 1994, the rest of the continent was now liberated. OAU had accomplished its task. So it was then transformed to AU. Now AU focuses more on development, cooperation, and unity of Africa. Unity has always been there as the core, right from the days when the founding conference was held here in Addis Ababa. There was the question of unity now, African Union government now. And there are two schools of thought. One, the union government now. The other one is gradual process of unity. Start first with the regional the building block. Were the Central African Union, and you have got the Maghreb Union. These are the building blocks of a united Africa. So here, AU has, since it was formed, done, I could say, a commendable work of trying to bring these African countries together and trying to deal with issues which affect the continent of Africa. If you look at my blueprint there, I have outlined critical issues. It talks about security, peace and security, because there can be no development if there's no peace. In 2013, they came up with silencing the guns. That's when they had coined the Vision 2063. In 2013, OAU was exactly 50 years old. They celebrated the golden anniversary of the movement. Now the focus of the next 50 years, that's why you have the Vision 2063. And here, number one is peace. And I think probably they were ambitious. They said they want guns to be silent by 2020. 2020 is 4 years ago. The guns were not silent then. Neither are they silent today. Why are they not silent? And how can they be silenced? That's a challenge facing the leadership of this organization. Food security is another one. As you know, I keep on saying that Africa is the richest continent in terms of resources. But the paradox is that the richest continent is also the poorest in terms of living conditions of its people. Of course, we blame the historical past, the colonization, the domination, the exploitation of our continent. But we're saying that it was past. What have we been able to do, and what are we able of doing to change this paradox? That is a challenge that is before us here. We have talked about InterAfrican Trade, because in development you require first resources that we have, both natural and human resources we have. Secondly, you require market where you're going to take your goods. You need first to produce the goods and don't have a market where you're going to sell them. Then you need infrastructure. Infrastructure will be a challenge because, as you know, the colonial system had partitioned Africa into smaller units and had not integrated these units. You find here it was a colony. This one was Belgium. Next to it here, this was one French. This other one here was Portuguese. This one here was English or British, and so on and so forth. And though they're neighbors, they're not communicating. There's no physical infrastructure that connected these countries. So the challenge is how to integrate these countries so that they can be able to trade with each other. Infrastructure is a major challenge. And then barriers. You have got linguistic barriers that are imposed on our people. And then this government came up with non-tariff barriers, which has made it difficult for goods to move from one country to the other. This is another challenge that is facing us here. You have got issues of health. As you know, we've got several pandemics which are here on the continent. How do you deal with this to make the people of the continent healthy and to deal with some of those diseases that emerge from time to time in the continent? Education is another challenge. Manpower development in the continent. Because, as you know, Africa today is the fastest growing in terms of population. Africa is the youngest continent demographically. 70% of our population are below the age of 35. The youth, as I was saying, can be a blessing or a curse. A curse if this youth is not empowered, if they're not given opportunities to acquire knowledge so that they can be productive. They become a drag to the society. They become drug addicts, delinquents, criminals. But if they are empowered with requisite skills and knowledge, then become a source for wealth creation in the society. This is the challenge again that we have in the continent across. Right now, many of our youths are jobless. Some of them have got skills which they cannot use on the continent. That's why many of them are voting with their feet, trying to leave the continent to look for greener pastures outside the continent. African youth, almost every other month here, are drowning in the Mediterranean, trying to reach greener pastures in Europe. How do you stem that tide? These people are basically escaping poverty. That's why they are trying to go to Europe. And that's the reason why we are telling Europeans to work with us, rather than working against us, to work with us so that we can be able to create an enabling environment where these youths will no longer have a need to leave Africa to go to Europe. We want to reverse this trend. This is another challenge to us as Africans here. We talked about hunger, famine on the continent. Africa has got the biggest arable land for food production today. Yet, we have food deficiency in almost all African countries. How do we reverse this trend? How do we improve agricultural production so that we can be self-sufficient in terms of food? Today, we are net importers. Insurgents, when this war between Russia and Ukraine broke out, many African countries suffered seriously because they found that most of them are importing grain from Ukraine and Russia. Why don't we grow these products here on the continent? And then the issue of climate change is a major challenge to the continent. Africa is a victim rather than offender in this subject of climate change, because Africa's emission is less than 5%, property reaches around 3%. But Africa suffers seriously the consequences of climate change. Many African countries today live between two twin disasters: floods and drought, El Nino and La Nina. So when the floods come, they come with the devastations. People are drowned in their homes. Houses are destroyed. Roads are washed. Bridges are washed away. So we found that serious damages that requires a lot of resources to repair. When La Nina comes, then again people suffer seriously. When animals are dying for lack of water, people are dying for lack of water. There's a famine across the continent. Seriously. How do we make the offenders, those people who have been vomiting this trash in our environment, that made the entire globe to warm up like this, to compensate Africa for the damages that Africa is suffering? If Africa goes as individual countries to negotiate, they have taken advantage of you. There's need for Africa to negotiate as one voice for adequate compensation for this destruction of our continent. go on and on. There's so many issues. Issues, of course, of the youth, issues of gender, the African woman. How do we make sure that the African woman is given her base recognition for the contribution that is making to the society? This is another challenge that is there. So then, in this new world that is globalizing, and where now new technology is come, we now have AI driving development. Where does Africa sit? And how does Africa use this new knowledge to leapfrog development, to be able to catch up with the rest of the world? This is a challenge, again, which the AU can lead the way for the continent. So we have a platform on the continent because we've got a lot of problems. We are trying to see that Africa moves closer to each other, like Europe today. If you look at the history of the European Union, it has been a history of step by step. It started first just as a cold union between France and Germany. It moved on until it became a European Economic Community, and then moved further to become the European Union. Today, the European Union is very effective in coordinating development in Europe. We have a European Parliament, which passes laws which are then adopted by the European governments. A far cry comparison to the Pan-African Parliament in Joburg. They've got a European Court of Justice, and then the European Union Executive in Brussels. So Europe is just as diverse as Africa. The European countries are very diverse. You need to know that just before I was being born, Europe was fighting against each other seriously. And after that, even coming together was a major problem. There was a lot of discrimination between Europeans. If you look at that fascism of Hitler, East Aryan race, and so on. They also got tribes in Europe. They are Anglo-Saxons, they are Latinos, they are the Slavs, and so on. But that has faded into oblivion. You could have a woman that can speak with one voice. Why should languages be a barrier on the continent? Oh, this one is an Anglophone, this one is Francophone, Russophone, Arabophone, and so on. We want to be Afrophones and speak as one people, as Africans. This is the most important thing in the continent. To have Africa for Africans, and Africa speaking with one voice for unity of Africa. Thank you.
A round of applause, please, for the candidate. Thank you. Thank you. previously indicated, please one